You're listening to the Two Tongues Podcast. And now your hosts, Kyle and Chris.
Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of the Two Tongues Podcast. Cut the music. We're going to get into a bit of opinion scholarship today on an ancient Egyptian text called the Cannibal Hymn. As you can imagine, quite a enigmatic hymn and a very ancient one. So you guys might remember, if you're a regular listener, that this came up recently. Came up in an episode that the last episode I did on Carl Jung's Red Book, called those series Gandalf the Red. And this came up. We brought up the Cannibal Hymn, and I read a small piece of it. But here's the thing. It's way too incredible to cover only in passing. So I decided to remedy that with a bit of opinion scholarship, and that's what we're doing today. I'm going to call this episode the Cannibal Hymn. This is referencing what's called utterances 272 to 274, primarily from this really ancient Egyptian hymn. You might wonder, what is it? What is the Cannibal Hymn? So let's start there. It's a very early example of what archaeologists call funerary texts. Now, in the Egyptian context, these are inscribed on the walls of pharaonic tombs, inside pyramids. They're also found painted on the inside of sarcophagi and even on occasion sealed amidst the layers of wrapping that are draped around the mummified body itself. What are they? These are like ritual instructions. They're guidebooks, cheat sheets in a word, to be used by the soul of the pharaoh after his death in his quest to pass from the mortal realm into the divine. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, you might have heard of. It's a famous example of a funerary text, but the Cannibal Hymn is far, far older, okay? It belongs to a corpus of the most ancient Egyptian inscriptions. Collectively, they are referred to them as the pyramid texts. And these date to the middle of the Bronze Age, so we're talking really, really old. Now, it should be said that there are pyramids that don't have these kind of inscriptions, in particular, earlier pyramids. So the pyramids at Giza, for instance, they're from Dynasty 4 of the Old Kingdom. They have no inscriptions whatsoever. There's, in the Great Pyramid, there's an inscription they found in the very top in a chamber. There's controversy about, if you remember the Graham Hancock topic, it comes up on interviews with Graham, whether the painted inscription up in that room in the Great Pyramid is to the time of the Fourth Dynasty, or whether it's later. I don't know. The point is, inside the chamber where the pharaoh would have been, presuming that those pyramids are tombs, which is not certain, but certainly it's the consensus that you would have these things painted on the walls, maybe on the ceilings, maybe both, that kind of thing. Okay, so in the Fifth Dynasty, though, this changes. And the very first pharaoh to decorate his pyramid with text was a gentleman named Unas. Unas dates to 2350 BC. It's somewhere in there. And it's from Unas's pyramid at Saqqara that we find this enigmatic Cannibal Hymn. It describes the divine transformation of the pharaoh after death into a god, but in a very unusual way. So unusual, in fact, that it was never reproduced in any other pyramid ever. Now, contrast this to the Book of the Dead we mentioned, which has been found in literally hundreds of Egyptian tombs. And you'll begin to understand my intrigue. So without further ado, I bring you the Cannibal Hymn of Old Kingdom Egypt. So what I'm going to do first, because I think I have to, I'm just going to read the hymn for you. It's abridged, so I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I want to read it to you without any context. I'm not going to give you any explanations. We're not going to dig in on the first pass. I just want to read through so you can hear it, and then we'll go back and we'll kind of dig into each piece. So again, these are instructions to the soul of Pharaoh. They appear there in the tomb so that when his soul comes out of his body, he sees these instructions and will help him along the way to the afterlife. So let me read this for you here, once through without stopping. So it gives him instructions about what he should say. So it says, say, and it begins like this. O lofty one, thou door of noon, Unis comes to thee. Cause this door to be opened for him. The stars are darkened, the bows are agitated, the bones of the earth gods quake. The agitations cease after they have seen Unis dawning as a Ba, as a god. The Kas of Unis are behind him. His gods are over him. Unis is the bull of heaven who suffered want and resolved to live on the being of every god, who ate their entrails that their belly was full of magic. Unis dawns as the Great One. It is Unis who judges with him, whose name is hidden, on this day of slaying the eldest gods. Unis is he who eats men and lives on gods. It is he who is upon the willows who binds them for Unis. It is Khonshu who slaughters the gods for Unis and takes out for him what is in their body. It is Shesmu who cuts them up, cooking for him a meal of them. It is Unis who eats their magic and swallows their spirits. He has completely encircled the two heavens. Unis is the great mighty one, the falcon, who surpasses the great falcon. Unis is a god older than the eldest. He has carried off the hearts of the gods. He feeds on the lungs of the wise ones. He is satisfied by living on hearts as well as their magic. He has swallowed the intelligence of every god. The lifetime of Unis is eternity. Its limit is everlasting. Who is within the boundary of the horizon forever and ever? Unis is as that which dawns, which endures, which endures. And that's how the hymn ends. So I hope you picked up, at least on the way it feels. There may be some things you didn't understand on the first pass, and we'll get into it, but hopefully you understood why this hymn is called the Cannibal Hymn. So I'll remind you, it wasn't called the Cannibal Hymn in ancient Egypt. It's become referred to as the Cannibal Hymn, and the reason is all of the things I just read to you. This emphasis on the Pharaoh eating the gods, cooking and consuming and eating the gods. And this is kind of the gist of what I want to talk about today. So let's rewind. Let's go back to where this begins. And let me just do what I do. Let's do the opinion scholarship thing. And I'll dig in and give you what I think is interesting. So anyway, it opens up where he's told to say, O lofty one, thou door of noon, Unis comes to thee. Cause this door to be opened for him. Okay, so what this is describing is the moment of the king's death. Well, when his soul rises out of his body, that kind of thing. And he comes to this door of noon. Okay, so you might wonder, what is the door of noon? Now, somebody who's dying and comes to a door might remind you of all kinds of things. There's a sort of a threshold, a mythological threshold, where you pass from the mortal world into the divine world. You know, maybe it's the river Styx or something like that. But the doors of noon certainly ring of that. Now, if you remember an episode we did last season called Search for God in Ancient Egypt, we encountered these 4 central creation stories, or theogonies, of ancient Egypt. And each one belongs to a different city. So there's one from Hermopolis, one from Thebes, one from Heliopolis, and one from Memphis. So I don't want to dig into that too much. If you're interested in some of the context surrounding those, go back and listen to that episode, The Search for God in Ancient Egypt, where I go into detail about it. But for now, let's push on. Now, these myths, they aren't identical from Hermopolis, Thebes, Heliopolis, and Memphis. They vary from each other. But they all do have one important element in common. So if you remember, all of these myths about the creation of the cosmos begin in the same place. And it is in a state of undifferentiated unity, which the Egyptians embody in a god they call Nun. Okay, so Nun represents the primordial waters. Now, this is a theme we see versions of all over the Near East and the Middle East. the abyss and the infinite deep we hear about in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, is an example. It's the state of existence in the beginning, right? Similarly, we have primordial chaos standing as the progenitor of the gods and the world from the Greek cosmogony of Hesiod, to say nothing at all of the deeply ancient goddess of the salt water in Mesopotamia, the dragon of chaos called Tiamat. In each case, these waters are acknowledged to be pre-existence itself. A lot of times, in modern times anyway, scientists will argue, physicists will argue about the state of things before the Big Bang. What was there before the beginning? And this is sort of an idea that scientists struggle with and philosophers struggle with, but it's similar, right? When we're talking about Nun or Tiamat, it's pre-existence. Okay, it's that which existed before there was anything to exist. The source and font of all things. Everything that is, both divine and mortal, come from its creative bounty. Okay, now let's look at a few examples. And this is where we're going to see pieces from those creation stories that I mentioned to you. So I'm going to start with coffin inscription. It's called Coffin Text 80, and it's about the creator god Atum. In the various cities that we're talking about, the creator god is given a different name, but the Egyptians all sort of understood and exchanged these stories between each other. They didn't see a difference when one city talks about the creator being Atum and another one talks about it being Ptah or Ra or whatever. This to them, the ancient Egyptians, they had no problem with this. They just said, okay, the creator god. Whatever you might call him, something like that. So we're going to begin with one where the creator god is called Atum. And Atum speaks of the beginning. And this is what he says. I was alone with the primeval ocean. The gods of the first generation had not yet come into being, but they were with me. So you see what I mean? I was alone in the primeval ocean. Well, what is the primeval ocean in Egyptian myth? It's Nun, okay? So the creator was there in Nun. But not just that. He says, the gods of the first generation had not yet come into being, but they were with me. So Nun not only has the creator within it, but all the other gods as well. Nun wasn't just the primordial chaos to the Egyptians, but a living, pregnant state of potentiality, already inhabited by the divine, even before a single god is born from it. The creator god pre-exists within it, just as the other gods do. Interestingly, a parallel to this exists in the Enuma Elish. This is a myth from ancient Babylon. And listen to how it describes the beginning and how similar it's going to sound. It goes like this. When skies above were not yet named, nor earth below Apsu, the first one, the begetter and maker Tiamat, who bore them all, had mixed their waters together. When yet no gods were manifest, the gods were born within them. Hear that? So Coffin Text 80 says, the first god, or the gods of the first generation had not yet come into being, but they were with me. And the Enuma Elish says, right? Tiamat bore them all. When yet no gods were manifest, the gods were born within them. So you have this idea of gods as potentials. They're there, they just haven't been made manifest yet. They're still there within the primordial god, within Nun. And this particular myth goes on to say that the gods being born within Tiamat, within those primordial waters, quote, stirred up Tiamat's belly. Now, this little detail bridges the gap to yet another version of this myth, a Greek version. In Hesiod's Theogony, we find a description of the primordial titan. His name is Kronos, and he's preventing any new gods from being born. How did he do it? Do you remember? By keeping the other gods within himself, just like we saw with Tiamat and Nun. Kronos, quote, swallowed each child as it came forth from the womb. Right, Zeus and all, or not Zeus, but all of his siblings get swallowed in the myth. Zeus, his mother wraps up a stone. Kronos swallows the stone instead of Zeus, and that's how the myth kind of unfolds. But in the beginning, Kronos is swallowing them all. He's not allowing them to come into being. He's keeping them within himself, just as we saw with Tiamat, just as we saw with Nun. So in all these cases, we see the same motif. There's one primordial divinity, a cosmic unity which pre-exists all things. It gives birth within itself to ever more divinities, representing all the divine powers in a state of potential. This is Nun. He is the font of potentiality, the place from which things come into being, where potential is transformed into actual, or in more mythic language, where chaos is transformed into order. All right, so back to the question of the door of Nun. What is it? It's the threshold, the boundary between the divine and the mortal. Crossing over it takes you back to the primordial womb, back into Nun, back to the state of potentiality where everything is one. And notice how Nun is beginning to sound like a monotheistic God, by the way, behind a facade of polytheism. In any case, this is what the Pharaoh encounters upon his death. What happens next? The hymn says, "The stars are darkened, the bows are agitated, the bones of the earth gods quake." All right, so the stars are darkened, right? The stars just poof out. The rainbows are shaking and trembling. The earth is shaking, right? So what's being described here? So the passing of the Pharaoh into the other world, it's followed by a response by the cosmos. Like the cosmos responds to the death of the Pharaoh. And we have what sounds like earthquakes and, strange things happening in the heavens and all of that. Now, I want to mention that there's maybe a familiar parallel for many of the listeners that comes from Matthew 27. And again, this is happening upon the death of Jesus, just like we saw here upon the death of the Pharaoh. What happens? Matthew 27 says, "The veil of the temple was torn. The earth shook. Rocks split." So we have the cosmos responding to the death of Jesus, very like we see here in the Cannibal Hymn. Now, I will say, just to kind of tie that parallel a little deeper, the Pharaoh was considered to be the representative of God on earth, or God made flesh. And this is, of course, the same role that we see in Jesus. Interesting, but let's continue. It says, "The agitations cease after they have seen Unis dawning as a god." Right? So the earth calms down once the Pharaoh emerges as a spirit or as a god. And this is the image here. It says, "The cause of Unis are behind him. His gods are over him." So I'm just picturing here the Pharaoh laying, the body of the Pharaoh laying in the tomb, his spirit coming out of it. See, the Egyptian concept of spirit or soul is complex. It has many pieces. So Ka and Ba are two pieces of the soul. Ba represents something more like one's life force. So in any case, the cause of Unis are behind him. So imagine the body of the Pharaoh surrounded by, pieces of his own soul. But not just that, it says his gods are over him. So, pieces of his own soul there floating around him, all of the gods kind of encircling him. So I just had this image in my head of the body of the Pharaoh lying there and just sort of this religious epiphany scene of all the spirits and gods surrounding him. And he emerges from his body as a god. And then something weird happens. It says, "Unis is the bull of heaven who suffered want and resolved to live on the being of every god, who ate their entrails, that their bellies were full of magic." Okay, so where to begin? Firstly, I'll say, here's where we get maybe the first hint of that cannibalism that starts to become prominent here. Like the bull of heaven resolves to live on the being of every god who ate their entrails and that kind of thing. So you're starting to see that. But first I want to point out when it says Unis is the bull of heaven who suffered want. I guess I want to point out that suffering want means that he's lacking or missing something. When he first crosses over into the divine realm or the realm of the dead, he's missing something. Unis, the bull of heaven, who suffered want. And how does he fix that want? It says, and he resolved to live on the being of every god, who ate their entrails, that their belly was full of magic. So this is like a solution to the want, right? Filling this gap. So he emerges into the new world, into the divine world, and he's lacking something, and he has to fill that lack. And this is what brings up the cannibalism motif. Now, we're not given any more explanation here about this bull of heaven idea. And it's interesting. I mean, I learned that the bull of heaven motif appears in ancient Egypt as a title, like as in what they call an epithet of the pharaoh. They also use it when they're talking about the high god. But in either case, it points to power and virility. Being a bull, very powerful, very very fertile creature, made an impression on mankind, and it has a central place in religion and all over the world. I mean, the cow is sacred in India. We have the Taurus constellation, things like that we can point to. But in ancient Egypt, in that context, bull of heaven was like a title that was given to the pharaoh. And we see other examples in the pyramid text. Okay, so both the pharaoh Teti, this is 2320 BC, and also Pepi I, 2280 BC. Both pharaohs are called the bull of the sky, who begets and rules the gods. So the bull of the sky begets, creates, and rules over all the gods. Well, that's an interesting idea. A divine being who gives birth to gods and rules over them seems a lot like a monotheistic God to me, but let's continue. Later examples from coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom refer to Ra by the same title, the bull of the sky. Okay, so it could apply to the pharaoh or it could apply to the high god. Unique to Unis's tomb, however, there seems to be elements of a lost mythic story. Okay, he's not just called Bull of Heaven as a title, is he? Now we're told the Bull of Heaven suffered want and ate the entrails of the gods. Okay, these are plot points. They are not merely a royal title. There's a myth here, and this is curious because we have no evidence beyond this one inscription of an Egyptian myth about a bull of heaven. And remember, the cannibal text is among the very earliest of these Egyptian inscriptions. So clearly a myth existed at some point prior to this that we have a reference to here, and then it is just lost. It's not repeated anywhere. So we have just this one hint of a lost myth from the time before the pharaohs wrote on the walls of their tombs. Now, if we're allowed to speculate, we might fill in the gaps by linking this motif to its most famous historical parallel, the Bull of Heaven myth from ancient Sumer. This goes back to 2100 BC, approximately, maybe older in oral form, but we know it's at least this old. And the myth is specifically about and titled the Bull of Heaven. Now, in this myth, the great king Gilgamesh angers the goddess Inanna, who goes up to heaven in a rage and releases the Bull of Heaven to destroy him and his kingdom. The story, of course, Gilgamesh slays the beast in a great heroic act to save himself and his people. Now, because of the proximity or relative proximity between Iraq and Egypt and the nearness in time between these two narratives, I would say it's fair to consider a relationship between them. Could it be that Pharaoh assumes the place of King Gilgamesh in the Egyptian version? I think that's likely. Is the epithet Bull of Heaven a reminder of the king's power over the divine? Remember, the Bull of Heaven gives birth and rules over the divine. So I think so. Okay, moving on. The text says, Unis dawns as the Great One. You might think that's a simple statement, maybe not much to it, but it's packed with meaning from a religious context, an Egyptian context. It says, Unis dawns as the Great One. Well, the Great One in the pyramid text, along with other Egyptian text, commonly refers to the god Ptah. Like Atum, who we saw earlier, Ptah is a creator god, is just another name that's given to this creator motif. So the Great One refers to Ptah. In the Shabaka stone, which is another Egyptian inscription we talked about before, it says this about Ptah. So listen. The gods came into being as Ptah. Ptah Nun, who begot Atum, the heart and tongue of the Ennead. So let me explain. When it says the gods came into being as Ptah, well, that means exactly what it says. It says that all of the gods, all of the Egyptian pantheon are Ptah, right? The many are one. All of the polytheistic gods are actually this one God, the creator Ptah. And then the next statement shows you that Ptah and Nun are actually the same God. Ptah, Nun, it's hyphenated. One God, Ptah Nun, who begot Atum. We just read that other passage about Atum being there in Nun in the beginning, along with all the other gods in their unmanifest form. So you see the conflation between the creators, Atum and Ptah, all there within Nun. Another thing it says here is that Ptah is the heart and tongue of the Ennead. The Ennead is that core polytheistic group of gods, the one God who is the heart and tongue of all the gods. So you can start to see what I find to be a very interesting conflation between monotheism and polytheism. It's a kind of henotheism that we really see in ancient Egypt. So Unis dawns as the Great One means that Unis reveals himself to be Ptah, Ptah Nun, the great God. Goes on to say, it is Unis who judges with him whose name is hidden on this day of slaying the eldest gods. Okay, so him whose name is hidden is one of these Egyptian epithets. It is a title that it refers to the god Atum, again, the creator. So it says, it is Unis who judges with the creator on this day of the slaying of the eldest gods. Okay, so Unis was just called in the prior passage here from the Shabaka stone. He was just called by the title of the creator god of Memphis, Ptah. He's called the Great One. The ancient Egyptians would see the Great One, and they know that means Ptah and only Ptah. So he's been given this title to himself. Now he is Ptah, and here he judges with him whose name is hidden. Now he's associated with Atum, the creator god of Heliopolis. So in short order here, we have him given the title, the Pharaoh's given the title of Atum, and he's given the title of Ptah. I also want to say, if you hadn't noticed, the motif of Pharaoh judging alongside the high god Atum is paralleled in the New Testament, right? Where Jesus is said to sit at the right hand of the Father and to judge the living. And I find that to be fascinating. All right, it goes on. It says, Unis who eats men and lives on gods. Okay, we have more of the Cannibal Hymn essence here. And then it says, it is he who is upon the willows who binds them for Unis. And this is also a very interesting thing that I learned researching this episode. He who is upon the willows is another one of these epithets, like we just saw. He whose name is hidden, he who turns himself into millions. These are all different epithets the ancient Egyptians used for the creator god. And they had them for various gods, of course. But in this case, this particular god isn't named. We don't see his name. He's not called Atum or Ptah. He's actually not referenced anywhere else in Egyptian history that would give us an answer to the name of this god. But what is the case is that a god existed in the earliest ancient Egyptian period who was referred to as he who is upon the willows, as a title. Okay, and it's an unnamed god, but it's an extremely ancient god, and it's a god of the riverbank, right, of the Nile. And he's attested to elsewhere, but we never see his name. So this is a god who does what? Who binds them for Unis. So this is a god who is assisting Unis and doing what? Well, let's keep reading and we'll find out, because other gods are helping. The next piece says, it is Khonshu who slaughters the gods for Unis and takes out for him what is in their body. It is Shesmu who cuts them up, cooking for him a meal of them. Okay, so now we have We have other gods that are helping along with this process. So he who is upon the willows is binding up the gods so they can't get away. Khonshu is coming. Khonshu is the moon god, by the way. He comes and he slaughters them and takes their organs out of their body. Another god, Shesmu, he's associated with wine, but also slaughter because he's associated with pressing. So you might press a grape to make wine. You might press a human body to kill them. So Shesmu is associated with pressing, and it's he who cuts them up and cooks them for Unis. This next scene coming here is a scene of transformation. In Christian language, we would call it a theophany. This is where the Pharaoh merges into the divine unity, where he becomes one with it. It says this: "It is Unis who eats their magic and swallows their spirits. He has completely encircled the two heavens. Unis is the great mighty one, the falcon who surpasses the great falcon. Unis is a god older than the eldest." So notice what just happened to Unis. The gods bring the gods to bear for him, chop them up, cook them. He consumes them, and when he does, it says he eats their magic and swallows their spirits. It says he has completely encircled the two heavens. So now Unis has become larger than large. He consumes even the heavens. It says Unis is the great one, the great mighty one, the falcon who surpasses the great falcon. Okay, this is one of these Egyptian phrases that the ancient Egyptians would have understood perfectly. You may not. Who was the great falcon? So the great falcon was the god Horus. Horus often considered to be, the Pharaoh is sort of the representation of Horus or what have you. But Horus takes a prominent position in Egyptian religion. Actually, he's there from very early times, but he becomes very prominent later in Egyptian history. But Unis is called he who surpasses the great falcon, right? He's greater even than Horus. Not only that, it says Unis is a god older than the eldest. So not only is he greater even than Horus, he's older than them all. He is the beginning of the beginning. So you see what this means. This means that he merges back into Nun, because Nun is, of course, the god that's older than the eldest, the pre-existent thing from which all the gods come. It goes on, it says, he has carried off the hearts of the gods. He feeds on the lungs of the wise ones. He is satisfied by living on hearts as well as their magic. He has swallowed the intelligence of every god. So he's eating all their organs. It makes all these references to the heart having all the magic in it. He swallows all that up. The intelligence, all of the intelligence of the gods comes into him. So he has become every god, all wrapped into one. What is that image of all the gods wrapped into one? That is Nun. And then it ends in this beautiful way. The lifetime of Unis is eternity, right? Its limit is everlasting. So now you can see he's become the highest of all gods, the eternal one, the everlasting, who is within the boundary of the horizon forever and ever. Well, that's, of course, the sun, the eternal sun that the Egyptians always worshipped or used as a representation of God. And it says, Unis is that which dawns, which endures, right? Unis is that, well, what dawns? The sun dawns, doesn't it? The sun endures. So he becomes associated with the sun. He's associated with Ra now, like we saw with Atum and Ptah and all these other gods. And that brings me to my conclusion. Okay, we all know that the Egyptian pharaoh was considered a living god, God's representation in the realm of the living. We also know that his death was seen as a transition back to the realm of the divine. But what we have here is a description of how that deification process actually works. It is primitive and poetic, but through all this, we can see, however murkily, that the Pharaoh joins the divine assembly by bringing them into himself, by consuming them. He unifies them with himself. He becomes one with them. Now, when I first read this, I couldn't believe my ears. The description of how the Pharaoh becomes a god was incredibly similar to the way the gods come into being in the Egyptian creation myths, but in reverse. The beginning and the end, they come together as one cohesive narrative, a kind of divine process or cycle. The beginning is the cosmic unity, Nun, within which all things exist in an unmanifest state. All the gods, even the Creator himself, merge together in its waters. From here we get the emergence of the Creator, and then the other gods, the world, and finally mankind. The Pharaoh, of course, is counted among the mortal beings that arise from it. And we could use different vocabulary here. We could say that Nun, or God, became the gods, just as it became mankind. God made flesh, you might say. We see this explicitly in the Egyptian creator god Atum, who is called he who turns himself into millions. So that's the beginning. But what about the end? The Pharaoh's end, his death, it runs the creative process backward. He consumes the gods one by one. All the gods which emerged from Nun come back together within the Pharaoh, quite literally. His passing into divinity through the door of Nun requires a reincorporation of all the divine powers back into one, back into Nun. A merging of identity. The one that became many becomes one again, something like that. This idea connects the beginning to the end. It unifies them in a paradox of eternal recurrence. I'm reminded here of the biblical description of God as the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Interestingly, the Cannibal Hymn presents this process as a divine one. It is not that the soul of the Pharaoh is running around slaying gods and stealing their essences to preserve himself in the afterlife. No. The gods are complicit with him. Khonshu, Shesmu, and he who is upon the willows assist the Pharaoh in their own demise. They subdue the gods for the Pharaoh. They cook them up for the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh simply eats. And when he does, he is called by the names of the gods. He's given their titles, the Great One, the Hidden One, the Falcon. And when all's said and done, he's given the greatest name of all, the name of pre-existence, of the divine unity called Nun. Once he swallows the intelligence of every god, he is called, quote, a god older than the eldest, the beginning. Alpha becomes Omega, and Omega Alpha again in an unending cycle. Now, I'll remind you that my interpretation of the Egyptian creation myths is not the standard one. The main difference is my emphasis on a kind of henotheism among the ancient Egyptians, a belief that the various gods of the Egyptian pantheon are not understood to be unique and independent beings, but rather something more like embodiments of the powers and attributes of the divine itself. And there's plenty of evidence of henotheism or even primitive monotheism in the ancient Egyptian religion that we could point to. And I do just that in season 5, episode 2, The Search for God in Ancient Egypt. Check it out. But here we have another piece of supporting evidence. Now remember, the Cannibal Hymn is among the very earliest pyramid text. It represents beliefs that existed at the dawn of the Old Kingdom. As such, it is one of our closest glimpses of the original beliefs of the Egyptians. And wouldn't you know it, it directly supports my interpretation. The Cannibal Hymn aligns with the creation myths completely. The creation myth begins in cosmic unity, from which is birthed the world. The Cannibal Hymn ends back in that cosmic unity, where the Pharaoh merges together in oneness with the gods. From noon you came, and from noon you shall return. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of Egyptian religion, and it's not a pantheon. The beating heart of Egyptian religion is not many, but one.
Well, there you have it. That's one avenue explored, but infinitely more still to go. I hope you enjoyed thinking along with us. I know. It's not easy work. Thinking. It's hard and full of uncertainties, but I'm grateful for the company as we trek through this together. Here's to hoping that the juice is worth the squeeze. See what I did there? Let's find out together in the next episode.